Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Upper Peninsula Environmental Coalition, The Energy Show. Tonight, we have special guest, Trevor Pawl, the chief of Michigan's new Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, talking about Transportation Next, Michigan's big plans to become smart, clean, and electric. Exciting stuff. Of course.
Good evening. Good evening, Trevor. Thanks for coming on tonight. We're really happy to be on the forefront of this new move by the governor to get us into the next phase of carbon neutral. And so tonight I thought we'd ask you a little bit about yourself, how you got to this job, and do you have family, and what's your connection to the UP? People love it.
Yeah, so, I've just been trying to stay relevant through the years and found my way into the future of mobility, actually. So my journey in state government started actually coming out of the recession back in 2008, 2009, 2010. I started a program called Connection Point at the Detroit Regional Chamber that meant to help sort of the sparks and steel American flag hanging over the CNC machine manufacturers that helped us win World War II, help them find new business coming out of the recession. That ultimately led to essentially a state program that did the same thing. And then through the years, I ran global trade or international trade for the state as part of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and then entrepreneurship. And then back in 2016, 2017, Governor Snyder approached me about helping lead efforts around the future of transportation and mobility. And so we started a program called Planet M. And now that we've transitioned administrations, I've been asked by Governor Whitmer to be the Chief Mobility Officer for the state of Michigan. And now it's about sort of understanding, in a weird world, with a pandemic and an economic crisis and climate change, how to leverage these new technologies to make life a little better. Although I don't think I've answered your question. So I have a wife and an 8-month-old, and my wife is actually, her family's from the UP, the Sugar Island area, and they actually are tied to the McCoy bloodline, which I've heard is royalty in Chippewa circles. So I went up there a few years back. I'd like to get up there again soon. It's beautiful. So, thanks for having me.
Trevor, we'll be talking about this later, but the governor's, made another step forward in terms of getting us into the carbon neutral state. And I think that's very relevant to what you're doing. And if you want to explain to us, what your office is doing and will be doing. And I think we've talked about it earlier, which is that it's transportation itself, as well as electrification of everything as possible in order to reach that carbon neutral state. So if you want to go ahead and give us background on what you're supposed to be doing and what kind of goals you're shooting for.
Yeah, sure. So I have slides and I have a couple minutes of presentation. You want me to throw that up?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Horst. I'm going to share my screen right now. All right, you should be able to see the screen. Do you see the screen?
We see the screen.
Perfecto. All right, guys, let's get rolling. So I'd like to begin by looking into the future, specifically the year 2030. Truth is, the next 10 years are going to be a landmark decade for the future of mobility. The mobility of people, of goods. Electric vehicles, for example, are expected to pass internal combustion engine vehicle sales by 2030. Software represents more than 50% of the value of a vehicle by 2030. And self-driving cars, at least partially autonomous cars that you still probably have to drive, but they can probably park themselves or maybe drive on a highway by themselves. Those are expected to make up almost 50% of new vehicle production by 2030. So the world is changing around us, and that's going to accelerate despite everything happening in the world over the next 5 to 10 years. And so the governor fundamentally believes this. He understands that the year 2030 is not just something future state officials just enter. It's something that today's officials will create. And so that's why the governor created this Office of Future Mobility and Electrification to have a dedicated resource that's focused on making sure that Michigan leads the world in 2030 and beyond. So today I wanted to spend a couple minutes really sharing two things with you. The case for change. So providing more rationale on why this stuff matters, frankly, and sort of where Michigan's at when it comes to the global competition around the future of transportation and how it ties into the Upper Peninsula. Rural mobility is crucial. You can't say you're a global mobility leader as a state if you're only servicing Detroit or you're only servicing the Lower Peninsula. And so over the next couple of years, we plan to be doing a lot more in the Upper Peninsula. But as you listen to some of the things I'm saying, even though they may be centered around Southeast Michigan at the moment, I think that technology will eventually make its way north. And then we'll get into specifically more of the strategy, the office, some of the objectives and the goals. So the creation of the office really was informed by 5 market trends. And you're probably familiar with these, but it's kind of a nice refresher, and they're so incredibly important to the narrative that we're trying to build around Michigan being the global epicenter for mobility. So these trends are industry disruption, workforce evolution, more competitive R&D and startup environments, and increasing importance of smart infrastructure, and then finally regional asset growth. So the first trend, industry disruption. So the last 10 years, there's that time frame again, 10 years, have shown a strong domestic auto industry. But Michigan's per capita income remains below the national average. So what does that mean? It means that a strong domestic auto industry no longer guarantees widely shared prosperity in Michigan. And the last decade has also seen new technologies disrupt the auto industry. This disruption is shifting profit pools and creating new winners and losers along Michigan's automotive supply chain, which does touch northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. So we're seeing like the traditional OEMs, the automakers, producing parts in-house again, like electric axles to claim a greater share of value. We're seeing new automakers like Rivian and Tesla challenge some of the old traditional automakers. The tier 1 suppliers to these automakers are moving backwards and becoming tier 2 suppliers to sell things like batteries and electronics. And then the tier 2 suppliers are actually skipping over the tier 1 suppliers and selling directly to Ford and Toyota and GM. And then you have non-auto players, companies that a decade ago were more focused on graphics for video games, now driving conversations and intelligence around the future of self-driving vehicles. So there's 4 terms that you hear a lot when it comes to the future of mobility: electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and then connected and shared vehicles, or technologies, I should say. So these terms really, I mean, when you hear them in Michigan, our minds almost always revert to the future of automotive. But the truth is these 4 terms, electric, autonomous, connected, and shared, they describe foundational technologies that work across mobility: air, land, space, and sea. The truth is the future of mobility is multimodal. It involves shipping, it involves maritime, it involves drones. And these are all things that northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula have natural competitive advantages around. And that's the focus of our office, is to make sure that our future is multimodal. Yes, we're very concerned about the future of auto and making sure that Michigan wins and continues to be the global leader for the next 100 years. But it's also very much about making sure that some of these other modes of transportation are recognized and that we build these industries here in Michigan. And frankly, due to the heavy reliance of these same foundational autonomous, connected, shared, and electric technologies, many modes of transportation and the industries around them are converging. So again, the future of mobility will be way more than auto. Like you think about a company that from northern Michigan, like Orbian Space Technology, they're doing what no other high-tech aerospace company has done before. I mean, they're offering a thruster system at a price that is actually achievable for emerging companies to leverage satellite services. And satellite services are critical to mapping and critical to self-driving vehicles and other things around the movement of goods and people. So even though it's a satellite company and even though it's in space, it still has fundamental implications on the industries that matter most in Michigan. And then I guess let's come back down to earth. When you look at shipping innovations and what the pandemic has caused, it's caused a regional push for supply chains. And in order to be a regional supply chain leader, our state needs smart infrastructure, from smart customs ports to autonomous freight solutions to last mile delivery. Autonomous technology should reduce logistics costs by 47% by 2030. There's that year again. And it could save Amazon up to $20 billion a year in shipping. And then when you add on drones, so commercial ground and aerial drones could represent up to 80% of consumer goods deliveries by 2026. So we look at these macro trends in Michigan and say, okay, a single global shipment can involve 30 organizations and over 200 interactions across various infrastructure assets. What can we do as state government and local officials, whether they're in Traverse City, Marquette, or Detroit, to grab more of those 200 interactions and build partnerships with more of those 30 organizations? And that's really sort of where our focus is. And there's a couple of immediate opportunities here. The first is Michigan's border crossings. I mean, they're globally significant, but underutilized. And smarter infrastructure could change all this. So Michigan, for instance, Michigan is home of two of the top 3 busiest rail border ports in the US, in Detroit and Port Huron. However, it's not a top 5 rail state, according to the American Association of Railroads freight rail rank. Rail is mobility too. And this is fixable. This is due to perceived rail congestion in Detroit and a lack of infrastructure around Port Huron. There's things we can do to advance one of our biggest advantages, our border. And that, I mean, we talked about Detroit and Port Huron, but Sault Ste. Marie is another one. And then when you look at drones, Michigan ranks 33rd, or the bottom half, in being a commercial drone-friendly state, but there's so much going on here. I mean, Michigan has multiple ground and aerial drone test sites and training programs at the University of Michigan, Michigan State, Kettering, and frankly, Michigan Tech and the Michigan Unmanned Aerial Systems Consortium Testing Center in Alpena. It has almost 11,000 square miles of airspace for testing. And that's really cool stuff. And these drone startups, these companies that are going to be changing the world over the next 50 years, they've actually raised over $36 million in venture capital in the last 5 years. So we have the pieces, and it's up to this new office to sort of bring them together and tell that story, and frankly, coordinate large drone-based activities to understand the feasibility of what it would look like to advance, for instance, goods delivery in the UP. Maybe it's just a 5-pound payload. I mean, maybe it's a drone delivering medical supplies to an island in Lake Superior, or maybe it's delivering a part the size of a quarter that's down, and it's costing that particular manufacturer hundreds of thousands of dollars because it's down. Have a drone deliver that in half the time that it would take for a truck. So let's get into the second market trend, workforce evolution. So the jobs impact of all these things that I'm talking to you about will be significant. Nationally, the mobility industry will need about 45,000 new people with computer-related engineering skills by 2030. Michigan will need about 12,000 of those people to retain its full position as a global mobility leader. And then when you compare the green tech jobs added in this chart to tech graduates, you'll see that only Illinois is losing more tech graduates. It's not good. Homegrown talent's got to be retained. And that starts with good upskilling and reskilling programs, credentialing programs. And that starts with working with universities a bit more. So, a student that graduates from Northern Michigan University, top of his class in engineering, can go to a place like Ford or Toyota and doesn't have to be retrained day one, because that actually happens. And that's something that this office and local leaders can take a big part of in making sure that these employers are talking to these universities. And then, I mean, we got to talk about R&D and startup environment. So they enrich Michigan's business R&D environment, and mobility startups actually have a larger job creation impact in Michigan than they do nationally. Michigan's the second highest receiver in VC funds to mobility and electrification startups. However, that's still just a tenth of California, and 94% of those VC funds are for hardware. what we're finding is software startup founders get educated here, but then take their ideas elsewhere to get funds. And so, you know, we need to do a better job, not only at sort of retaining these software founders, and we need to also, frankly, work on our venture capital system. You know, Orbian was able, I used that example earlier, able to leverage a great smart zone network that we have in the state of Michigan through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. They were able to find funds. They were able to enter pitch competitions. And it's almost like an assembly line. They were able to like get on the line and find the right resources. The resources were demystified because sometimes government resources can be a bit mysterious. Like, where do I start? And frankly, you know, this mobility conversation stretches across all of these industries. And I think if we can get this right, this assembly line process right, and we are making steps to do that, like it can impact all of these other focus industries. The fourth market trend is smart infrastructure, which I talked about earlier. I mean, it's a foundational platform to drive business attraction, growth, and job creation. And really, it does two things. It can create economic opportunity as it saves lives. So MDOT has activated nearly 500 miles of technology-enabled corridors. And in turn, GM, Toyota, Bosch, Ford, all these companies not only tested on these roadways, but invested in these roadways. And it's true, where you test, you invest. You know, in the Southwest, we're losing a lot of work to Texas right now because there's a great testing environment. They've made it easy. And these companies are investing there, especially with autonomous trucking, long haul trucking. I mean, I personally think the Upper Peninsula is a great place to test autonomous trucking. And so what can we do to attract more of these companies? That's something we need to talk about. And then the other half of this is the more important half. Almost 10,000 fatal car crashes in Michigan have happened in the last decade. 94% of those are because of human error. So the sooner we can get some of this smart infrastructure here, the more lives can be saved. And one of the first big wins of this office was the announcement a few weeks ago of a self-driving vehicle corridor between Detroit and Ann Arbor. And that project's going to be led by the Michigan Department of Transportation. And it's going to be in partnership with a company called Cavenue, which is actually backed by Alphabet, which is Google's parent company. And they're based in Silicon Valley and Brooklyn. So you're having companies from the coast come in and invest in Michigan because they see so much potential. I mean, for something like this, if you really wanted density, you could have just picked a port location in Long Beach, California, but they chose Michigan because of the public-private partnerships. And frankly, the first that MDOT had already achieved. And the policy that we passed in 2016, which allows companies with a manufacturer's plate to test autonomous technology on our 28,000 miles of roadway. I mean, those are the sorts of things we can do, those policy levers. We can pull those to attract more jobs and attract more opportunity. And then our final market trend that's sort of shaping the reason why this office came to being and shaping our work over the next couple of years is regional asset growth. And now I'm totally going to be sounding like Michigan fanboy, which I should be that in this job, right? But Michigan's unique mix of regional assets give clusters like Silicon Valley, Israel, and other high growth markets many, many, many opportunities for deeper partnership. And you know, you can see a list of some of these competitive advantages that we have on the right. I mean, you look at the hardware gap that some of these high growth markets have. They have a high concentration of software companies that need rapid prototyping, low value manufacturing. Well, guess what? Michigan operates with factories that have access capacity a lot of the time, and especially during traditional auto off cycles. And then you look at supply chain, like there's some risky international supply chains in these high growth markets. Some of them are cost prohibitive, others have a high IP theft risk. Michigan has a deep, reliable manufacturing expertise. And of course, you guys know all about testing. I mean, a lot of these high growth markets have limited access to diverse testing environments. So Arizona, Texas, California, they have great testing environments, but it doesn't snow very much down there. So, you know, they can't do the cold weather testing as well. We can do both cold weather and the warm weather testing, maybe not desert testing, but we can do a more diverse set of testing. If you're a self-driving vehicle company, if you're a drone company, if you're working on the future of transportation. So all this to say, we have a lot of great assets, but Michigan has some pretty strong competitors, from San Francisco to Shanghai to Tel Aviv to Munich. You're seeing Shanghai do amazing things when it comes to electric vehicle subsidies, $10,000 per vehicle. Tel Aviv built a startup ecosystem from scratch, and it leads the world now. Munich continues to lead the world in automaker R&D. We're doing a lot of great things. We're attracting a lot of great companies. From 2016 to 2019, we created 32,000 jobs in the mobility space, but more can be done. And that's why this office was created, to actually look at what can be done and then execute. So now I just want to get a little bit more into the strategy of this office, now that I've sort of set the table as to why it exists and sort of the state of the state in terms of mobility and electrification. So this vision came to life when the governor signed an executive order back in February to create a new Office of Future Mobility and Electrification. The vision for this office was a stronger state economy and safer, more equitable, and environmentally conscious transportation for Michigan residents. For this group, environmentally conscious is key to victory. And so within that vision, sort of between the lines, if you will, there are guiding principles that I'd like to share with you. The first is, a systems approach will create economic development advantages. How people and goods move is not isolated to one mode. Simply being the best at autonomous passenger cars is too narrow of a win to claim global leadership over all mobility. And so these core elements that I talked about earlier, autonomous, connected, shared, and electric vehicle technologies, are systematically linked. And a state that intentionally and consistently can integrate those into its existing transportation framework, so it's not just tech for tech's sake, it's actually helping people get to their jobs, get to a doctor's appointment. That's a state that's going to win. The second guiding principle is collaboration between public and private sectors. So leveraging public investment to seed private investment. And that's what we did with the Detroit to Ann Arbor vehicle corridor to some degree. The last 5 years, we've really invested in that corridor, MDOT has. And that created frankly, a great environment for a larger play and to do something that's never been done in the world, is self-driving vehicle corridor, a road of the future. And then third, responsive policy is a core asset. It's very much a guiding principle of ours. A state that focuses on new policy frameworks that account for future mobility scenarios. That state's gonna have the agility to hold leadership positions when things evolve rapidly like they are right now. And then finally, and I mentioned this before and I'll mention it again, smart infrastructure is a new and cutting edge economic development tool. It can be used to create new business models, it can be used to create jobs, and it can be used to save lives. And our attention is gonna be squarely focused on smart infrastructure. And so you talked about the vision, read between the lines, and talked about the guiding principles. And now you see the 6 core objectives. 6 core objectives. So they really do, I hope you see this, they really do mirror what was in the case for change. The point is to have a through line that extends from these objectives to the vision to the case for change. You see it, increase mobility investment in Michigan, engage more mobility startups, expand Michigan's smart infrastructure, accelerate electric vehicle adoption in Michigan, further enable Michigan's mobility workforce, and bolster Michigan's mobility manufacturing core. And so, specifically number 4, I think pertains to you. You mentioned at the top of the show, the governor pledged yesterday to relentlessly cut carbon emissions, create clean energy jobs, and make Michigan carbon neutral by 2050 in a bid to fight for climate change. And I love that. I love that so much because it is, number one, it's responsive. We've all seen the orange skies in California, and frankly, when that orange haze passed into Michigan on its worst night, I was walking home, and my walk's about 1.5 miles, and I felt it in my lungs. And I can't even imagine being in California and what that would have been like if I had to walk the same distance. So to me, I get it. And frankly, it ties directly into what this office is about. And it unlocks the opportunity to do a lot more innovative strategic programming faster because this executive order is in place. And there's actually 2 executive orders. There's the one to create the state's healthy climate plan, and that was joined with governors from Rhode Island, Washington, Colorado, and then There was also, I believe, a U.S. climate alliance as part of the Democratic governor's efforts. So it's a state effort, but what's almost more important is that it's a multi-state effort. And that ultimately leads to national efforts eventually. So an important stat too, before I go to the next slide, I was talking to the director of the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, Liesl Clark, recently. And she mentioned one stat that just threw me, and I never even realized it, but CO2 from transportation has exceeded CO2 from built infrastructure as of 2017 globally. That's crazy. And so to me, read no more than that sentence to know how mobility ties to the climate. Finally, I wanted to hit on something that I feel like is very important. So this office will take an integrated approach to sustained economic development or sustained job creation, sustained environmental change. Nothing that I've talked about here today exists in a vacuum. That's for sure. I mean, strong talent pools, whether it's in Sault Ste. Marie or St. Ignace or Flint, that's going to attract growing companies. And those growing companies are going to create innovation pipelines, new product ideas, or they're going to expand and have new features to their existing products. And they're going to get new clients, and those clients are going to want to be close to them. And so these innovation pipelines aren't only going to help those startups, those growing companies, they're going to help the established companies in the region, whether they're automakers, suppliers, or something else. And so now you have these smaller companies, these growing companies, these automakers, these suppliers, these large companies, all sort of filling the same innovation pipeline with new technologies. But where do you test these technologies? Well, you need smart infrastructure. You need the ability to leverage Michigan's assets to test these new technologies. And once you do that, and enough of these new technologies are out there in the world, and they're creating jobs because people are buying these new technologies, then you begin to further advance and bolster that infrastructure, and that reinforces Michigan's advantage or any state's advantage. And then what you see from that is a bolstered talent pool, more training, because you need to learn how to operate these new technologies. And so your training program is strengthened. All of these things work together. It is a perfect circle if you can do it right. And that's what our team's focused on. And the levers we're going to pull are dynamic programming, responsive policy. We're going to do it together with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, the economic development arm of the state. We're going to do it with the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, which focuses on talent and workforce. We're going to do it with the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, which focuses on the grid and charging impact. And then we're going to do it with MDOT, which focuses on infrastructure. So that was a little bit about the office, the why, what we're focused on. And I'd love to open it up. I hope I didn't talk too much.
No, that was great. Thank you, Trev. I'd like to ask you a few things. I'm really excited about this opportunity that we have to reset transportation in a way. And everyone recognizes all the mistakes that we've made in the last 100 years with vehicles and transportation as they are, and we really want to do it right this time.
Yeah.
And with this new executive order and directive to be more sustainable, be carbon neutral, I think there's going to be a lot of people who maybe just don't believe that we're heading strong enough in the right direction, especially because of the fact that, like the state really has to attract these companies. These companies certainly have made some commitments to the environment, but they do have a profit motive. They do essentially have the same motivations that the original auto industry had. And we want to avoid this new electric auto industry and transportation industry, whether it's cars or trains or whatever it is, from going down the same path. And there are possibilities that a lot of the new technology will require resources that will require more intensive mining, will require all sorts of infrastructure buildup. We might need to build high-speed internet all along the highways in order to get these vehicles working. What do you see are the biggest pitfalls as far as the environmental impact of this new electric infrastructure, and how are we going to mitigate those problems and all the resource consumption and electricity consumption that could get in the way of its sustainability?
Yeah, so I think the biggest pitfalls have nothing to do with intent. It has to do with the actual physical infrastructure and the dollars that you're going to need to do this in a way that makes it the better option. You know, you could introduce a bunch of electric vehicles into the state fleet in the Michigan's thumb or parts of the Western VP, but there's no charging infrastructure. What good is that? It becomes inefficient, and it could impact state services. So you need to make sure that you're keeping up with the Joneses in terms of expanding the charging infrastructure. You're not selecting technology that could be obsolete. I mean, you look at a charging station right now, they're ugly, they're big. And eventually, I think we're going to be entering a world where there's just going to be wireless charging in motion. And so you got to make the right investments beyond just making the investments. And then you need to continue to sort of look at your policy. What can we be doing to streamline permitting and installation? You know, what can we be doing to create interesting interstate partnerships? One of the examples I like to use is what the mountain states have done. You could get in your car in Boise, Idaho and drive to Albuquerque, New Mexico with wonderful consistency in charging location and charging experience. And the news from DTE and consumers about a Midwest charging network that came out yesterday, it was a big news day for EVs, was really positive. And that's something that we can get behind. And, you know, I think there's something to be said too about business models. If we're entering into an electric future, at what cost? At what expense? How are we going to make sure that whether it's gas station owners or different sorts of maintenance crews, repair shops, like how do we make sure that it doesn't leave them behind? Dealers, think of anyone right now that services an internal combustion engine. We all know that we need to head towards a world with a cleaner environment, a more sustainable environment. But how do we do it in a way that promotes competition, creates jobs, and gets this done by 2050?
Well, one good example is, you know, Tesla has butted heads with Michigan a lot in the past over trying to bypass dealers, not allowing repairs from third parties on their vehicles. You know, companies like that have a very strong control over every aspect from selling the vehicles to working on them and everything. Do you see that becoming more and more of an issue as we move toward electricity?
Yeah, I do. Much like it was when we switched from horses to internal combustion engine vehicles. There's not going to be a silver bullet answer here, but we need to let competition play out. And there's other Teslas out there, Rivian, Lordstown, Bollinger. These are emerging companies that have tremendous futures. And these are companies that are trying to democratize the electric vehicle experience. I think Tesla serves a certain customer, but Lordstown serves sort of working class business customer. And Rivian serves an environmentally conscious, young professional, established professional. So I think we need to make sure those audiences are served by these companies and create an environment to do that. And I also don't think the state should be, how do I put this? Getting in the way of these companies is probably the best way to put it. But also sort of not just talking to these companies when there's a conflict, but creating constant dialogue with these companies to understand their needs and their wants, where they want their charging stations. And that's how we're going to get this right. And that's in lockstep with the utilities and other stakeholders as well.
You know, another opportunity, just one more comment. Another opportunity that these open up is to have more shared vehicles. We could do things like creating trains from electric vehicles. Of course, we might need special lanes for those. I don't know if you're looking into anything like that, you know, faster lanes for, you know, autonomous vehicles and things like that. But of course, now we're in a COVID situation where people are very concerned about health and cleanliness and maybe don't want to share spaces. Maybe we can do some innovation and cleaning in between things. But do you see the COVID pandemic impacting transportation?
Well, it has. I mean, you look at the early months of the pandemic, you really saw four things happen where the mobility industry and COVID-19 cross paths. You know, canceled and delayed automotive projects, vehicle launches, Public transit was abandoned, in some cases 70% year over year in places like Australia and Germany. Automotive, like COVID-19 shut down 93% of US auto production for 2 months. And then there was an 80 to 90% drop in ticket sales for the airlines, not to mention all the PPE, supply chain bottlenecks, and other things. So these are all mobility problems that the pandemic caused. But what you're seeing is actually 4 significant solutions. You're seeing cities like Oakland, California, close 10% of their roads and open them up only to bikes, micromobility, walking. Cities are redesigning themselves to deal with the pandemic. You're seeing rapid innovation in curbside delivery, contactless curbside delivery, ground drones, unmanned vehicle systems. And frankly, you're seeing public sector officials following suit because they're loosening permitting rules that have been in place for decades to make sure that small businesses can survive. They can do delivery pickup. So that's an area, curbside innovation, to watch over the next 10 years, because it's one of the few areas where the private sector, I think, is evolving as fast as the public sector and vice versa. One of the areas that we've been focused on in the last couple of months is renewed focus on vehicle sanitization. So we ran a COVID-19 mobility solutions challenge, and we ended up awarding dollars to a company that created autonomous robots to clean airport concourses during off hours. And then there was another one. So there's this new ultraviolet light technology that actually disinfects the air and the surfaces in autonomous shuttles. We actually, not a lot of people know this, but we have the longest public autonomous shuttle route that exists in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with Maine Mobility. And they just launched that last year. It was a big deal. And you're still in the infant phases of this being a major transit option. We don't want to see it go away. So we worked with a Grand Haven, Michigan-based company to get some of this technology installed in those shuttles to make them safer. And sometimes it's as easy as plastic dividers. As part of that grant, we worked with Penske to just create plastic dividers for Detroit buses. And so obviously in the regionalized supply chain, that's the last thing. Like, you're seeing an amazing effort, I think, from different manufacturers to retool and distribute PPE after the big bottleneck. And that's as much a warehousing logistics mobility story as it is anything else. So there's just a lot of change, but positive change. At least that's what we're seeing in this industry.
That's great, thank you.
Evan, do we have any questions in the Facebook feed?
No, if anyone would like to ask, please do comment on Facebook or comment in Zoom. I'd be happy to pass these along. If anyone who's in Zoom right now would like to speak up, you're welcome to ask a question right now. I'm seeing some lip movement here. Let me unmute you, Linda and Dave. Just a second.
There we go.
Hi, Linda.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Hi.
Oh, great. Okay. I'm assuming that all of this this technology will involve 5G, correct, to run the vehicles?
You know what? It's an ongoing debate. I think 5G is where we're all going eventually, but how much does that cost? And how quickly do you roll that out across a large geographic area? And how does that blend with closed circuit communication, which is called DSRC, which really only works, at an intersection where a vehicle and a stoplight sensor at a corner are able to communicate and share data with each other. So I think, I'll tell you the area that I'd watch over the next couple of years in Michigan, that's going to be sort of a determinant on how successful the rollout of 5G can be, will be the Detroit-Ann Arbor corridor that I discussed earlier.
Okay. Do you know if there's been any studies on health effects of 5G on human and wildlife populations?
That's a good question. I'm assuming somewhere. I haven't read that study, or maybe it was done for 4G or 3G, but I don't know.
Well, this is something that UPEC is definitely keeping up with and looking into. There are some concerns about potential effects on smaller living things. for humans, it's very likely that when we look at 5G, we're looking at really two different things. We're looking at updates to the protocols, which means that everything is the same except for the data that's being structured. So data is being structured in a way so that you can have a lot more devices on the same, everything else, the signal is the same, it's running on the same frequencies and everything. It's just a different data structure that's more efficient. We're also looking at millimeter wave rollout. Now, millimeter wave is short range. It uses an entire different range of the electromagnetic spectrum. It hasn't been rolled out in large areas for very long. It's kind of, it's been around for a long time, but we're just starting to utilize it. That's where there are some concerns, especially about things like the power utilization of it, the longevity of the towers, how is it going to affect things like insect populations. There's a lot that we don't quite know yet. And UPEC is definitely concerned about, like how this might be used in rural areas. Like I was saying, like if we have to have millimeter wave rollouts all along the highways to connect with drones and cars, there's some concern about, well, it's going to require a lot of materials. It's going to require a lot of power. It could have some unknown effects. And I hope that there's more research done on that, because I do think it's a very important subject.
Well, and that would take us to drones too. And how would we, would the airspace be regulated in some ways if there were a lot of drones making constant deliveries?
Yeah, that's a big concern of mine. I mean, the sound of drones annoys me. The buzz. I think there's two ways to look at that. There needs to be new laws, traffic laws for the sky, low air, to govern an increase in density of drones in the sky. I think what you're going to look at in the sky in the future is not necessarily a free-for-all. I think you're going to have road systems. Like you're going to have highways in the sky that, and you can develop or not develop under or over those systems, similar to how you can develop or not develop next to a subway line or a highway. But there also needs to be, because drone laws are very city specific at the moment, and often drone deliveries expand across into other cities. So, sorry, there's a motorcycle that's like rolling by. But you're gonna need to have technology that in real time can look down at that city's laws and say, are we abiding? And that, I mean, it's out there, but it's not commonplace yet. So that's one of the areas with Michigan. It's like, could we do something to test the feasibility of that technology that could then unlock opportunities for cross-city delivery? Once we can begin to have a beta test to see, okay, here's what it looks like. Here's what it looks like when it flies over people and things. We can begin to see, okay, what are the sound levels? What are some of the environmental issues that we're facing? And then we can make decisions on how to make sure that it's not too intrusive or intrusive at all.
A lot of unknowns still.
Telling me,
yeah.
No.
Thank you for your presentation.
Background's very like symmetrical. There's a lot of stuff to look at.
Yeah.
We have another question here from Elizabeth. It says, would the electricity really be safer for the environment? Because I thought fracking was necessary for the gas that powers our electricity.
I honestly, I don't know what's going on with the motorcycles outside of I'm at. Can you read that again? It's like a
yes, the comment from Elizabeth is, would the electricity really be safer for the environment? Because I thought fracking was necessary for the gas that powers our electricity.
Fracking is like another level. But I think there's renewable sources of energy that can also power electricity. And I think that was part of, the thinking with the governor's executive order and, the work of Eagle is, okay, how do we expand our portfolio of renewable energy options?
That's another
about fracking, but to me, I don't think it's not necessarily necessary, but it is something that is at the moment. It's not necessarily in the future of all things and 200, 500 years from now, but right now, yes.
Trevor, this is Horst. I've got a couple of questions related to how this is going to work out for rural versus urban areas, because what we're dealing with is the other part, government subsidies, and you know I'm assuming the future will have similar inequality as we currently have. So how do we work this out as people eliminate the internal combustion engine and move into electric vehicles and you know this different ways of in which it will be headed in terms of your own vehicle, rented, leased, you know, you mentioned connected and all of that kind of stuff. So the question is, how are we going to fare in the future as far as you're able to ascertain at this point?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I believe in the year 2070, people will still be driving. I don't think driving is going away. And that's important for rural areas because you are not going to have the type of options in 2070 that a city would have, like a large city would have. I do think that large cities are moving towards subscription models where it is easier for you to buy into a monthly plan that allows you access within 2 or 3 minutes or whatever is more efficient than getting in your car and driving around to find a parking spot. Whether it's an e-rickshaw, a scooter, electric vehicle, or something else. I think these subscription plans are going to be multimodal and they're going to be the future, and they're going to be able to get folks around metropolitan areas. That said, I think there will still be driver lanes. I think a majority of lanes may be dedicated in cities to autonomous or electric corridors, but the driving lanes are going to be expensive, and there could be new sorts of revenue models around empty seat taxes, and even new gas taxes. It just won't be affordable in cities to drive a car. But that's where I think government in 2070, I don't know, how old will I be in 2070? All right, 37. I'd be like 80, 87, 90? I'd be up there, but I'd still be alive. You know, I think the public sector can play a role. There's going to be these new models that are going to be introduced en masse in cities to make living more affordable. There needs to be some level of probably some subsidy to make sure that the same taxes or the same constraints that someone would have driving in a city don't exist in rural areas. It's a little easier to drive. And over time, I would hope that ride-sharing technologies become a bit more advanced in rural areas, even if it's just getting Lyft for the first time or Uber or whatever else is going to come our way in the next couple of decades. I would hope that adoption shifts a bit more than it has.
I was wondering about another area, which is the electrification that is going to be coming. I think people kind of wonder what does that mean for me? You know, how is electrification going to affect me in terms of stuff? I mean, we have elements of it in our lives already. Yeah. So it's not like it's brand new, but it's going to be more overarching, and is it going to mean that people are going to have less control over their domiciles?
Maybe. Yeah. It's going to require a change in lifestyle. I think probably more trip planning is going to be necessary if you want to do a longer trip with an electric vehicle. Right now, I don't look to see where the gas stations are if I drive from Detroit to Chicago. But there's probably going to be an interim phase where that's going to be something we need to do. Hopefully there'll be some technology, and there already are some good options to accompany you on that journey. It's as easy as possible. I think you're going to have to be used to new models with your utility company. And I think ultimately, if you're going to own an electric vehicle, you're probably going to need some sort of home charging component, which could up your bill and take up room in your garage. You know, I mean, like you're going to have to think about like, okay, if I charge, it's not going to be as simple as just filling up. Like I'm going to have to wait around. What do I do? And does that create an opportunity for some of these rural areas at charging stations now become the new town square, or the new area by which folks can gather, folks can rest, folks can be entertained. How does that look?
I think that's good that we're thinking about it, because I realized when I was listening to a program, which, matter of fact, was the one where I heard your name come up on, and it talked about the difficulties and expense of putting charging stations in. From what I'm gathering, looks like we're going to have to actually rewire the country to some extent in order to be able to have that kind of power coming into cities, because you can't just plug it into somewhere and expect it not to have an effect upon the whole electrical system.
Yep. I'll tell you, you know who I'd watch right now when it comes to all that? State of California. The announcement they made yesterday was bold, and I like it. I like that it was bold. I mean, if you're the governor, think of it. If you're lucky enough to be the governor of California, I mean, in these times where your state's burning up, and literally, like, you cannot. I have a friend in San Francisco couldn't leave her apartment with her child because it was too hard to breathe, and she was worried about her child. If you're the governor and you have something that you can do to help that, I would act. I would 100% act. And so them picking the year 2035 and saying after that, we will have no new car sales unless there's zero emission. That's bold. That's really, really bold. And I think now with that executive order in place, they're going to have to hustle to make sure the charging infrastructure is in place, not just in San Francisco and San Diego and Fresno and LA, but everything in between. They're going to have to figure out the dealer networks. They're going to have to figure out the maintenance networks. And in many ways, they will be leading the world in this industry because of policy over the next 10 years. And that, to me, I think it's exciting because it gives us reasons to talk to them. It gives us reasons to partner. And to me, they've been trying to do it for years. This isn't a left field idea. I mean, cars, trucks, and other vehicles are the largest emitters of greenhouse gases in California. They make up about 40%. So something had to be done. At what point does something have to be done? I will tell you the point. The point is when there are orange skies, cardboard cutouts of fans as the Oakland Athletics play baseball. That's when something probably needs to be done with the environment.
Evan, do we have any more questions from our audience?
I'm not seeing any other questions right now. Since we've been talking about that executive order, let's just take a quick look at that. So this just came out yesterday, and I'd just like to read the beginning of that because I think this is going to be an important executive directive. So this says, the science is clear and the message urgent. The Earth's climate is now changing faster than at any point in the history of modern civilization, and human activities are largely responsible for this change. Climate change already degrades Michigan's environment, hurts our economy, and threatens the health and well-being of our residents, with communities of color and low-income Michiganders suffering most. And I think that last point is really important because communities of color and low-income communities are all over Michigan, and they're very important to us. And I think we recognize that there's an opportunity right now to serve a lot of these people that have been underserved, especially in the UP. You have a lot of low-income communities. You have a lot of people doing great things with limited resources. And hopefully this will be an opportunity to give those people a boost.
100%. I mean, you answered it. I don't know if I have anything else to add.
Well, the other thing is that the Michigan Public Service Commission is saying that it's seeking recommendations for updated integrated resource plans to consider Governor Whitmer's goal to reduce emissions. And so they are actually asking, for people to start sending them information, questions, comments, so that they can start working to improve our infrastructure. This leads me to an interesting question. Since the MPSC has control over the utilities, and I know they have been working to get the utilities to be more proactive on renewables. How is that going to work with your office?
So I guess I'll back up. I can give you a structural answer. Again, I'm only, what am I now? I'm almost 3 months into my job. So we're still in setup mode to a large degree as to how we're going to work with some of these partners. But what I can tell you is that we are going to have a council on future mobility and electrification. And this is a idea that was actually born out of the Snyder administration that was carried over by the Whitmer administration. And it was reformatted by Governor Whitmer and her team. And we're hoping to make some announcements on it very soon. So this council is going to be charged with providing recommendations to legislature around the future of electrification and EVs, grid, and around autonomous vehicles. As it relates to the environment. I mean, a lot of the autonomous vehicle laws in the vehicle, those are sort of federal jurisdiction, right? So as part of that council, we're going to have industry, high-level industry representation, legislators, and state department heads. And so the MPSC, as well as EGLE, are going to be members on that council. And so we're going to be able to meet with them monthly and talk about substantive policy as it relates to the future of mobility. And my goal is to advance their goal. And I'm not doing my job if I'm not helping them get to where they need to be.
Well, sounds like you've got a big job ahead of you.
Yeah.
So hopefully you'll get additional help along the way as you move along. You know, I really want to thank you for coming on tonight. And I know it's an extra stressor to give these talks, but you know, I think it's important for people in the UP to understand that this stuff is happening in Lansing, but it's not going to stay in Lansing. It's going to go statewide. And as always, you know, we're concerned up here that we're going to be left behind, and which again will work against us because people will, you know, want to leave because they're saying, oh, there's no jobs up here. So we need to, you know, have the, you know, the stuff that you're talking about, you know, the STEM that in the education and in the industries are important also. So I'm, you know, very happy that you were able to come and give us an idea. And I'm hoping that when you get that council going, that, you know, the rural areas will be able to, you know, participate, because I realized that, you know, when I moved to Michigan about 12 years ago, I didn't realize how rural the state is.
Where are you from originally? Do we know this? Did our viewers know this? That you're not originally?
So,
He escaped from Wisconsin, I think.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, the point is, I didn't realize, you know, how concentrated the population is, and even though Michigan is a third larger than Wisconsin, you know, it has almost twice as many people, and you would think that the whole state would be crowded, but it isn't. You know, and so you have maybe about 15 counties that are urban areas, and the other 68 are pretty much rural for the most part. So that's the reason, you know, we're concerned up here about, you know, not having you know, a fair chance at being involved in this, and you know, because what we are able to do is protect our forests and our water and air, because that's all we've got. Yep. You know, that's really something that people don't pay any attention to when we're talking about all these projects. You know, so I just want to let you know that we're concerned, and we want you to let us know if in the future if we can be of any assistance.
Well, what I can let you know right now is you've never been more relevant. The future runs through the UP. You can get mobility right in a place like the UP, the world can get it right.
Well, thank you very much again. And really appreciate you coming on, and you know, we'll contact you again in the future and see if you're still sane, and tell us what's going on.
Yeah. At least the motorcycle sounds went away.
Okay.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much, Trevor. I hope you meet a lot of interesting people in this job. I just want to say I'm really happy that you're putting a strong focus on research here, because a lot of the things that people have brought up, like dirty electricity, these are things that we really do need to solve. We need sustainable energy. We need better ways to plan our infrastructure. We need to make it accessible to everybody. Things that we talked about like charging. I hope that in the future, charging could work more like in-flight refueling, where if you're on the highway and you have a charge and someone else needs one, your autonomous vehicles could hook up and you could maybe exchange some electricity right there. Who knows? Like, anything's possible. And I hope you talk to people who think outside the box, because we really do need some solutions for these issues. And we can do it right. We have that opportunity right now.
I agree. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
All right. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for having me. And yeah, hopefully we get to talk again soon.
take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Evan, you want to show people what we're going to be doing next month?
Absolutely. So next month, October 15th at 7 p.m., we have Stephanie Creed, Water Resources Specialist, Keweenaw Bay Indian Community, hear about KBIC's unique water quality program. Now, we had Stephanie on the call previously when we talked about beach cleanup, and she had a lot of great things to say. She is definitely a hero for all the garbage she removes from the beaches up there, and water is very important to us at UPEC.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the technical part, as well as all those great questions you had, Evan. And I want to thank our audience for participating tonight, and hopefully you'll join us next month on October 15th. So take care and enjoy the fall weather.
And register to vote.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye-bye. Evan, I'll give you a call in a few minutes. Or you